Vanessa Whitmore believed a guest list could decide a person's worth, but before the night was over, the name she erased would stop an entire gala in its tracks. The Whitmore Grand Hotel rose above Manhattan like a monument to polished money, its limestone entrance glowing beneath rows of warm golden lights, its revolving doors spinning endlessly as black cars pulled to the curb. Inside, the lobby shimmered with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and the soft echo of expensive shoes crossing toward the ballroom. It was the kind of place where people lowered their voices not because they were humble, but because they wanted their confidence to sound effortless. Men in tailored tuxedos adjusted cuff links that cost more than a month's rent in Queens. Women in satin gowns moved carefully beneath diamond earrings that flashed each time they turned their heads. Waiters in white gloves carried trays of champagne through clusters of donors, board members, executives, and socialites who knew exactly how to smile for cameras. This was the Whitmore Grand Charity Gala, the annual event everyone in the city's elite circles wanted to attend, especially this year. Rumor had spread that the foundation would announce its largest scholarship expansion in a decade, enough funding to send hundreds of children from low-income neighborhoods to private tutoring programs, summer camps, and college prep courses across New York. Every guest wanted to be seen in the room when that announcement happened. Every donor wanted their name connected to generosity. Every photographer wanted the perfect shot of compassion wrapped in designer fabric. Near the front entrance, Vanessa Whitmore stood behind the check-in table with a silver clipboard tucked against her chest like a badge of authority. At 42, Vanessa had built her reputation on control. Her blonde hair was swept into a flawless twist, her ivory gown was sharp enough to look professional even under ballroom lights, and her smile had the careful chill of a woman who could compliment someone while quietly deciding they did not belong. She was not the founder of the charity, not the largest donor, not even the final decision maker, but she controlled the door, and on a night like this, the door felt like power. Staff members moved around her nervously, because everyone knew Vanessa did not tolerate mistakes. A misplaced place card could earn a whisper that felt like a slap. A guest seated at the wrong table could ruin someone's week. And a person who looked out of place could become, in Vanessa's mind, a threat to the image she had spent months polishing. Then Emily Carter stepped through the revolving doors. She came alone, without cameras, without a driver waiting behind her, without the practiced entrance of someone expecting attention. She wore a simple navy dress, clean and modest, the kind a woman might choose for church, a school ceremony, or a quiet dinner with old friends. Her brown hair was tied low at the back of her neck, with a few soft strands loosened by the cold March wind outside. Her coat was plain. Her shoes were comfortable. Around her wrist was a small silver watch, old but carefully kept. Nothing about her announced wealth. Nothing about her asked the room to admire her. Yet she paused just inside the lobby with the stillness of someone carrying a reason deeper than status. Her eyes moved past the chandeliers, past the cameras, past the tables of flowers, and settled for one brief moment on the large banner above the ballroom doors, Whitmore Grand Charity Gala for Children's Futures. A faint softness crossed her face. 10 years. 10 quiet years. That was how long Emily had helped build the scholarship program from behind the curtain, never demanding a speech, never requesting a portrait, never caring whether the city's most powerful people knew her name. She had always believed that generosity was cleanest when it did not need applause. But tonight was different. Tonight, several of the children whose lives had been changed by the program would stand on that stage and tell the room what opportunity had meant to them. Emily had promised herself she would be there, not as a celebrity, not as a symbol, but as a witness. She took a small cream-colored invitation from her purse and walked toward the check-in table. Vanessa noticed her before Emily said a word. The smile on Vanessa's face did not disappear. It simply changed shape. Her eyes traveled from Emily's dress to her coat to her shoes, measuring, sorting, dismissing. Around them, the lobby continued to sparkle, but a colder silence formed at the edge of the table. Emily offered the invitation with a gentle smile and said her name. Vanessa looked down at the clipboard, then back up at Emily, as if the answer had already been decided before she read a single line. And somewhere in the ballroom beyond them, a microphone waited for the one name Vanessa thought she had the power to erase. Vanessa lowered her gaze to the invitation in Emily Carter's hand, but she did not take it right away. She let the pause stretch long enough for the two volunteers beside her to notice, long enough for a couple in evening wear to glance over, long enough for Emily to feel the quiet assessment settling over her shoulders like cold air. Finally, Vanessa accepted the card between two fingers, as though it might leave a mark. The invitation was real. The embossed seal caught the chandelier light. Emily's name was printed clearly in black ink, elegant and undeniable. For 1 second, Vanessa's face tightened, not with confusion, but with irritation. She had spent months shaping this gala into a perfect display of status and benevolence, and perfection, in her mind, could not include a woman who looked as if she had taken the subway instead of arriving in a chauffeured car. Emily Carter, Vanessa repeated, her voice smooth enough to sound polite to anyone not listening carefully. Let me check. Her red-painted fingernail moved down the list with theatrical slowness. Emily waited quietly, hands folded around the strap of her purse. Behind her, the line grew by 3 more guests. A man in a black tuxedo checked his watch. A woman in a silver gown leaned toward her friend and whispered something behind a jeweled clutch. The words were too soft to hear, but the smile that followed was not. Emily had known that kind of smile all her life. It was the smile people gave when they wanted to feel superior without admitting it out loud. Vanessa flipped one page, then another. That is strange, she said at last. I am not seeing you here. Emily's expression remained calm. I was told everything had been confirmed. The foundation office sent that invitation directly. Vanessa looked at the card again, then gave a small laugh that carried no warmth. Sometimes invitations are forwarded, copied, or misunderstood. These events can become confusing for people outside the donor circle. The words landed softly, but the meaning was sharp. People outside the donor circle. Emily looked past Vanessa toward the ballroom doors. Through the opening, she could see round tables dressed in white linen, centerpieces of ivory roses, and a stage framed by blue velvet curtains. On that stage, a podium stood beneath a gold spotlight. Somewhere behind the curtain, the student speakers were probably waiting, smoothing their notes, hoping their voices would not shake. That thought steadied her. She turned back to Vanessa. I understand how busy tonight must be. Could you please check under Carter Hope Foundation? One of the young volunteers, a college-aged man named Ryan, glanced down at the digital tablet beside the clipboard. His brow furrowed. I can look in the system, he offered. Vanessa's eyes snapped toward him, quick and warning. I am handling it, Ryan. The young man immediately lowered his hand. Emily noticed the fear in his face, and for a moment she felt sorry for him. There were people who were cruel because they enjoyed it, and others who stayed silent because they were afraid of losing something. Both kinds filled rooms like this. Vanessa returned her attention to Emily. Carter Hope Foundation has representatives seated at table 12, she said. But there is no individual guest listed under your name. Emily knew table 12 well. It had been arranged for the program directors, scholarship coordinators, and 2 former recipients who now worked as mentors. Her seat had been reserved separately near the stage, at the request of the board chair, though Emily had resisted that arrangement until the last possible moment. There may be a separate entry, Emily said gently. Perhaps under honoree or special presentation. Vanessa's smile sharpened. Honoree? The single word rose just enough for the people behind Emily to hear. A small hush gathered. Emily did not flinch. That is what I was told. Vanessa set the invitation down on the table, no longer pretending to inspect it. Miss Carter, this is a high-profile charity gala with limited seating, private donors, elected officials, and families who have supported this institution for generations. We cannot allow anyone to walk in because they claim there was some special arrangement. Emily felt a warm flush climb her neck, but her voice stayed even. I am not claiming anything. I am asking you to verify it. Ryan looked again at the tablet despite himself. His finger moved across the screen, then stopped. Something changed in his eyes. He leaned slightly toward Vanessa and whispered, "Her name was in the system earlier. It looks like it was removed this afternoon." Vanessa went very still. The marble lobby seemed to hold its breath. Emily heard the distant clink of glasses from inside the ballroom, the soft tuning of strings, the polite laughter of people who had no idea a small act of erasure was unfolding at the door. Vanessa slowly turned the tablet away from Ryan and placed her hand over the screen. "Then it was corrected," she said. "And corrections are made for a reason." Emily looked at her, steady and silent. Vanessa had not found a mistake. She had found evidence. And instead of opening the door, she chose to guard it more tightly. Emily Carter held Vanessa Whitmore's gaze for a long moment, and in that quiet space between them, something more than a guest list seemed to be tested. The line behind Emily had stopped pretending not to listen. A councilman with silver hair shifted impatiently. A woman in emerald silk tilted her head with the delicate curiosity of someone watching a problem that did not belong to her. Two photographers near the ballroom doors lowered their cameras slightly, sensing tension but not yet understanding its shape. Vanessa, however, understood exactly what she was doing. She had seen the record on the tablet. She had seen that Emily had not imagined the invitation. She had seen the digital note showing a manual removal at 3:47 that afternoon. Yet instead of admitting the mistake, she lifted her chin and turned the situation into theater. "Miss Carter," she said, speaking with careful volume, "I am sure this is uncomfortable, but we have strict protocols. When a name is not active on the list, entry is not permitted." Emily looked down at the cream invitation resting on the table. The paper had been handled by 3 assistants, mailed from the foundation office, and confirmed twice by email. More importantly, Emily knew why she had agreed to attend after years of staying anonymous. A boy named Marcus Bell, now a freshman at Columbia University, had asked if he could thank her in person. He had written that the scholarship did more than pay for school. It made him believe his future was not a locked door. Emily had carried that sentence with her all week. She had folded it into her heart like a note she could touch when the world felt unkind. "Could you call Mrs. Alden?" Emily asked. "She is the board chair. She will clear this up." Vanessa's smile tightened. "Mrs. Alden is preparing for the opening remarks. She cannot be disturbed every time someone has a seating concern." "This is not a seating concern," Emily said softly. "It appears my name was removed." A flicker crossed Vanessa's face. It was small, almost invisible, but Ryan saw it. So did the young woman beside him, a volunteer named Maya, who had been placing name cards into neat stacks until her hands went still. Vanessa placed the tablet flat on the table as if closing a book on the truth. "Names are adjusted constantly during major events," she said. "Donors cancel. Staff lists change. Duplicate entries are removed. It is administrative, nothing personal." But it was personal. Emily could hear it in the way Vanessa said administrative, as if rules were only rules when they protected people already inside. Behind Emily, someone whispered, "Maybe she is with catering." Another voice answered, "No, catering has uniforms." The words were quiet, but the marble lobby carried them cleanly. Emily's fingers curled once around the handle of her purse, then relaxed. She had worked with families who had been dismissed in hospital waiting rooms, school offices, banks, and court hallways. She knew how humiliation could arrive dressed as procedure. She knew how a person could be made to feel invisible without anyone raising their voice. Vanessa leaned forward slightly. "Let me be direct. This gala has attracted significant public attention. We cannot risk confusion at the entrance. You may contact the foundation office tomorrow if you believe there has been an error." "Tomorrow will be too late," Emily said. "For what?" Vanessa asked, and the question carried a thin edge of mockery. Emily did not answer immediately. She looked toward the ballroom again, where the orchestra had begun a gentle piece and the first guests were taking their seats. The children would be backstage now. The scholarship families would be checking programs, smoothing jackets, fixing collars, reminding nervous sons and daughters to stand tall. That was what mattered. Not Vanessa. Not the whispers. Not the polished cruelty of a woman who mistook a clipboard for character. For the people I came to support, Emily said. Vanessa gave a small, dismissive nod, as if Emily had confirmed everything she already believed. That is a lovely sentiment. But sentiment does not grant access. She turned toward a security attendant standing near a column. He was a tall man in a dark suit with an earpiece, professional and uncertain. Vanessa lifted 2 fingers, not rudely enough to be obvious, but clearly enough to command. Please assist Miss Carter toward the lobby exit while we continue check-in. The air changed. Ryan looked down. Maya's lips parted, but no words came out. The guests behind Emily stepped back half a foot, creating space around her as if embarrassment were contagious. Emily felt every inch of that space. She felt the chandelier light on her face, the invitation on the table, the eyes waiting to see whether she would protest or disappear. The security attendant approached slowly. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low, almost apologetic. "I am sorry, but I have to ask you to step aside." Emily looked at him, then at Vanessa. Her eyes remained steady. "You do not have to be sorry for following orders," she said. "But someday, make sure the orders you follow do not make you forget the person in front of you." The lobby went silent. The silence did not last long, because rooms built for wealth rarely allow discomfort to breathe. A man behind Emily cleared his throat, and the check-in line began to shift again, eager to move around the woman who had become an inconvenience. Vanessa seized the movement like permission. "Thank you for understanding," she said, though Emily had not agreed to anything. The security attendant stepped to the side and opened a path toward the lobby, his expression careful, his hands visible, his voice still respectful. Emily picked up her invitation from the table. For one brief second, Vanessa's fingers pressed down on the edge of it, as if even the paper offended her. Emily looked at that hand, then slowly lifted her eyes. Vanessa released it. No apology came. No correction. Only the shining lobby, the watching guests, and the soft cruelty of a door being closed by someone who enjoyed the sound. Emily turned away from the check-in table and walked toward a quiet seating area near the grand staircase. She did not leave. Not yet. The security attendant followed at a polite distance, relieved perhaps that she was not making a scene. Vanessa watched her go, then leaned toward Ryan with a voice low enough to seem private, but sharp enough to cut. "Do not question my decisions in front of guests again." Ryan swallowed. "I only saw the record in the system." "Then forget what you saw," Vanessa said. "Tonight is about presentation." Maya lowered her eyes, but her face had changed. Something about Emily's calm had unsettled her more than Vanessa's anger. The young volunteer looked toward the seating area, where Emily had taken a chair beneath a tall arrangement of white lilies. Emily sat with her purse in her lap, the invitation resting across her fingers. She looked less like someone defeated than someone waiting for the truth to catch up. In the ballroom, the first notes of the evening program floated through the open doors. Guests were being directed to their tables. Laughter rose and fell. Silverware chimed lightly against china. Near the stage, Jonathan Reed, the master of ceremonies, reviewed his cards with a practiced smile. He was a familiar face in New York philanthropic circles, a former local news anchor who knew how to make donors feel noble and audiences feel moved. He glanced at the program order, then at the sealed gold envelope placed beside the podium. The envelope carried the name of the evening's special honoree, withheld from most staff until the announcement. Only the board chair, Patricia Alden, the foundation director, and Jonathan knew the truth. Emily Carter was not merely a guest. She was the quiet force behind the scholarships, the anonymous donor whose contributions over 10 years had covered tuition support, counseling services, college application fees, winter coats, laptop computers, bus passes, and emergency grocery cards for families who had been one setback away from giving up. But at the entrance, Vanessa had reduced her to shoes, fabric, and doubt. Emily looked down at the invitation and thought of the first check she had written to the program. It had not been a public pledge or a dramatic gift. It had been $5,000 sent after she met a mother from the Bronx who worked 2 jobs and still could not afford test preparation for her daughter. Emily remembered the girl's name. Alicia. She remembered the mother's tired smile. She remembered thinking that dignity often depended on whether someone else opened one small door at the right moment. After that, one gift became another. 5,000 became 50,000. Then a foundation. Then partnerships. Then entire classes of students whose futures widened because Emily believed help should arrive before hope disappeared. She had never wanted applause for it. She wanted outcomes. She wanted acceptance letters taped to refrigerators. She wanted parents crying in school parking lots because their children had been given a chance. And tonight, the children were here. That was why Vanessa's insult hurt, not because Emily needed status, but because the same kind of judgment had followed many of those families through every institution that should have welcomed them. Across the lobby, Maya quietly picked up the tablet while Vanessa greeted a judge and his wife with a bright, polished smile. The young volunteer tapped the guest record again. Her face grew pale. The deleted entry had not vanished entirely. It showed the user who removed it. Vanessa Whitmore. Maya stared at the screen, then looked toward Emily. At that exact moment, the ballroom lights dimmed, and Jonathan Reed stepped up to the microphone. The conversations inside softened. The hotel seemed to inhale. Vanessa turned toward the ballroom with satisfaction, unaware that the night she had tried so carefully to control had just begun to slip from her hands. Jonathan Reed's voice filled the ballroom with the calm confidence of a man who had stood behind hundreds of microphones and knew how to make a crowded room feel personally addressed. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a night dedicated to possibility. Applause rose beneath the chandeliers, clean and practiced, while guests settled into their chairs and lifted their faces toward the stage. Vanessa stood just inside the ballroom entrance, one hand resting against the doorframe, satisfied by the sight of the room she had shaped. The tables looked perfect. The flowers were balanced. The donor names were printed in gold. To Vanessa, beauty was order, and order meant certain people were allowed in while others were kept out. Behind her, in the quieter lobby, Emily Carter remained seated beneath the white lilies, hearing every word through the open doors. She did not look angry. She looked thoughtful, the way someone looks when a painful moment has touched an older memory. Her invitation lay across her lap. The cream paper seemed almost fragile now, but Emily held it as if it still mattered, not because it granted status, but because it represented a promise. In the ballroom, Jonathan spoke about children who had crossed long odds, families who had made impossible sacrifices, and donors whose generosity had turned closed doors into open hallways. His words were warm, but Emily listened for the names. That was why she had come. Not for her own. For theirs. At table 12, the Carter Hope Foundation team had begun whispering among themselves. Patricia Alden, the board chair, a white-haired woman in a deep blue jacket, looked toward the empty seat near the stage and frowned. "Where is Emily?" she asked the foundation director, Thomas Green. Thomas checked his phone, then the printed program. "She confirmed this afternoon. She should be here." Patricia's expression sharpened. She knew Emily well enough to know that lateness was not her habit, and absence without explanation was not her character. Before she could stand, Jonathan invited the first student speaker to the stage. A young man in a dark suit rose from a front table, straightened his tie with nervous fingers, and walked toward the podium. Emily recognized him immediately. Marcus Bell. He looked taller than the last time she had seen him, broader in the shoulders, but his eyes still carried the same careful hope she remembered from a scholarship interview 5 years earlier. He stood at the microphone and unfolded a paper that trembled slightly in his hands. "My name is Marcus Bell," he began. "When I was in 8th grade, my family was living in a one-bedroom apartment in the South Bronx. My mother worked nights, and I thought college was something that happened to other people. The ballroom grew quiet. Even Vanessa, still near the door, paused to listen. Marcus continued, his voice gaining strength. He spoke about tutoring sessions paid for by the scholarship program, a summer science camp in New Jersey, a used laptop that changed everything, and a mentor who told him he was not behind, only waiting for the right support. Emily lowered her eyes. She remembered approving that laptop request. It had cost less than many guests in the ballroom had spent on shoes for the evening. Yet to Marcus, it had become a bridge. Tonight, Marcus said, I was hoping to thank the person who made that help possible. I was told she might be here. Patricia Alden turned fully toward the empty seat now. Thomas Green stood halfway from his chair. Vanessa's posture stiffened. A small unease moved through the ballroom, not yet visible to everyone, but present, like a draft under a closed door. In the lobby, Maya stood frozen with the tablet in her hands, staring again at the record that showed Vanessa's name beside the deletion. Ryan saw her face and stepped closer. What is it? He whispered. Maya swallowed. She did remove her. It was not a correction. Ryan looked toward Emily, then toward the ballroom. We have to tell someone. Maya hesitated. Vanessa's warning still rang in her ears, but Marcus's voice from the stage cut through her fear. Some people give because they want their names on walls, he said. But the person I want to thank gave before most of us ever knew her name. Emily closed her eyes for one breath. Vanessa turned sharply toward the lobby, as if sensing the truth moving behind her. But truth, once awakened, does not stay seated forever. Maya moved before courage could talk her out of it. With the tablet pressed against her chest, she stepped away from the check-in table and walked toward the ballroom doors, her black flats making almost no sound against the marble. Ryan followed half a step behind her, his face pale but determined. Vanessa saw them at once. Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time that evening, her perfect composure showed a crack. Where do you think you are going? She whispered. Maya stopped only long enough to meet her gaze. To tell Mrs. Alden there has been a mistake. Vanessa crossed the small distance quickly, her ivory gown catching the light like polished stone. There is no mistake, she said, each word clipped and quiet. Return to the table. But Marcus Bell was still speaking inside the ballroom, and his voice carried into the lobby with the strength of someone who had waited years to say thank you. When I did not have application money, the foundation paid it. When I did not have a winter coat for interviews, someone made sure one arrived. When I thought people like me were only invited to stand outside beautiful rooms, someone proved that a door could open. Emily sat very still beneath the lilies. The sentence settled over her like a mirror. She had spent years opening doors for children she might never meet, and now she was sitting outside one, stopped not by a rule, but by the vanity of someone afraid generosity might look ordinary. Vanessa reached for the tablet in Maya's hands. Maya stepped back. It was a small movement, but in that lobby, it felt enormous. Ryan looked at Vanessa and said, "The record shows the deletion came from your account." The words were not loud, but they were clear. The security attendant heard them. So did the councilman waiting near the entrance. So did the woman in emerald silk, whose expression shifted from amusement to discomfort. Vanessa's face flushed beneath her makeup. "You are a volunteer," she said to Ryan, smiling in a way that no longer resembled kindness. "You do not understand event management." "I understand timestamps," Ryan said. His voice shook, but he did not lower his eyes. 3:47 this afternoon. For one breath, no one moved. Then Patricia Alden appeared at the ballroom entrance, drawn by the tension and the empty chair that had become impossible to ignore. She was not tall, but the room seemed to make space for her. Her white hair framed a face lined by years of decisions made without needing applause. "What is going on here?" Patricia asked. Vanessa turned instantly, her smile returning too quickly. "Mrs. Alden, there was a minor check-in issue. I handled it." Patricia looked past her and saw Emily seated by the staircase. The change in her face was immediate. Shock first. Then concern. Then a quiet anger that did not need volume. "Emily," she said. The name cut through the lobby more cleanly than any accusation could have. Several guests turned. Vanessa's smile froze. Emily rose slowly, smoothing the front of her navy dress. She did not rush forward. She did not dramatize the moment. She simply stood with the invitation in her hand, graceful in a way that made the chandeliers seem suddenly less important. Patricia walked to her. "Why are you out here?" Emily glanced once at Vanessa, then back to Patricia. "I was told my name was no longer active on the list." Patricia's eyes moved to the tablet in Maya's hands. "Show me." Maya handed it over without hesitation. Patricia read the screen. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Around them, the lobby grew still, the kind of stillness that arrives when everyone realizes the truth has entered the room and will not be leaving quietly. Inside the ballroom, Marcus finished his speech. Applause began, warm and rising, but Patricia did not clap. She looked at Vanessa and said, "You removed the guest of honor." Vanessa opened her mouth. No words came. Not one useful sentence. Not one polished excuse. The applause from the ballroom spilled into the lobby, but at the check-in table, all anyone could hear was the sound of Vanessa's clipboard slipping from her hand and landing against the marble floor. The clipboard struck the marble with a flat, embarrassing sound, and for once Vanessa Whitmore did not move quickly enough to recover what had fallen. The silver board lay at her feet like a small piece of authority suddenly made useless. Around her, faces changed one by one. The councilman who had been impatient moments earlier now stared at Emily with the awkward stillness of a man realizing he had stepped away from the wrong person. The woman in emerald silk lowered her jeweled clutch. The security attendant took one careful step back, not out of fear, but out of respect. Patricia Alden held the tablet in both hands and read the record again, as if giving Vanessa one final chance for the facts to become something else. They did not. Emily Carter was confirmed, Patricia said, her voice quiet but carrying through the lobby. Her seat was assigned. Her presentation cue was approved. Her name was removed manually less than 4 hours ago. Vanessa found her voice at last, but it arrived thin and uneven. "Mrs. Alden, I was protecting the integrity of the event. There were concerns about unverified entries. I made an administrative judgment." Patricia looked at her for a long moment. Integrity does not require humiliating someone at the door. The sentence did not need to be loud. It reached everyone. Vanessa's mouth tightened. She glanced toward Emily, then toward the ballroom, where the applause for Marcus Bell had faded and Jonathan Reed was preparing to continue. Inside, guests were lifting programs, unaware that the most important part of the evening had nearly been left in the lobby. Emily stepped forward before Patricia could say more. "Patricia, please," she said gently. "The students are waiting." That was Emily's instinct, even then. Not revenge. Not spectacle. Not making the room bow for her discomfort. She thought first of the children backstage, the families sitting upright in borrowed formal wear, the young speakers who had practiced their lines in apartment kitchens and school hallways. Patricia's expression softened, but only for Emily. "You should have been welcomed," she said. Emily gave a small, sad smile. "Many people should be." Maya looked down, and Ryan swallowed hard. That one sentence seemed to move through them more deeply than anger would have. Vanessa, desperate to regain control, reached for the clipboard and tried to straighten her posture as she rose. "Of course, Miss Carter may enter now," she said, forcing brightness into her tone. "There has clearly been a misunderstanding." Patricia turned toward her. "No. There has been a decision. And now there will be accountability." Vanessa froze. "Mrs. Alden, surely this can be discussed privately." "You made it public when you denied her publicly," Patricia said. "You made it public when you allowed guests to watch her be escorted aside. You made it public when you treated a woman's dignity as something optional." The lobby went still again, but this time the silence was not awkward. It was attentive. Emily could feel eyes on her, but they no longer carried amusement. They carried recognition, apology, and in some faces, shame. The security attendant stepped forward and opened the ballroom door wider, this time not to remove her, but to welcome her in. The sound changed immediately. Warmth spilled out from the ballroom, the soft murmur of hundreds of guests, the hum of lights, the faint rustle of programs. Jonathan's voice returned to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, before we continue, we have reached a moment that defines the purpose of this evening. Patricia offered Emily her arm, but Emily shook her head softly. She would walk on her own. Not because she was proud, but because she wanted every person at that entrance to understand that dignity did not need an escort. She passed the check-in table slowly. Ryan lowered his eyes, then lifted them and said, "I am sorry, Miss Carter." Emily paused just enough to answer. "Thank you for telling the truth." Maya's eyes shone, but Emily gave her the same calm nod. Vanessa stood near the fallen edge of her own composure, hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles paled. Emily stopped beside her. For a moment, everyone expected a sharp word, a public correction, something that would make the humiliation complete. Instead, Emily said quietly, "A guest list can be edited. Character cannot." Then she stepped into the ballroom just as Jonathan opened the gold envelope under the spotlight, and the entire room began to turn toward the woman Vanessa had tried to leave outside. Jonathan Reed looked down at the gold envelope, then lifted his eyes toward the woman now entering through the ballroom doors. For a brief second, his polished presenter's smile faltered, not from confusion, but from recognition that the moment had arrived in a way no program card could have planned. The blue velvet curtains behind him glowed beneath the stage lights. The chandeliers above the ballroom cast warm reflections over hundreds of faces, each one turning slowly toward Emily Carter as she walked in alone. Her navy dress, so plain in the lobby, seemed different under the light now, not richer, not grander, but steadier than all the sequins and diamonds around her. She did not hurry. Every step across the carpeted aisle was quiet, and somehow that quiet became louder than applause. At table 12, Thomas Green stood first. Then Patricia Alden entered behind Emily and remained near the doorway, her eyes fixed on Vanessa, who lingered just outside the ballroom as if the threshold itself had become a judgment. Jonathan adjusted the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying across the room with new weight, "every year, this gala honors generosity. But tonight, we honor something even rarer. Generosity without performance. Commitment without spotlight. A kind of giving that did not ask for a seat at the front, even though it built the room we are sitting in." A hush fell so completely that the soft click of a camera near the side wall sounded too loud. Emily stopped halfway down the aisle. She had not expected this. She had agreed to a brief acknowledgement, perhaps a small wave from her seat, nothing more. The stage, the lights, the turning heads, all of it felt heavier than she had imagined. Marcus Bell stood beside the podium now, still holding his speech. When he saw Emily, his face opened with a kind of relief that made her throat tighten. Jonathan continued. "For 10 years, one woman has funded tutoring, college preparation, transportation, winter clothing, technology, counseling, and emergency family support for students across the city. She asked that her name be kept out of press releases. She declined interviews. She redirected praise toward teachers, mentors, parents, and students. But tonight, the young people whose futures she helped protect asked that she finally be seen." The first murmur moved through the ballroom. A few guests glanced at their programs, searching for a name they had overlooked. Others leaned toward one another, whispering questions that no longer sounded amused. Vanessa heard every word from the entrance, and with each sentence, the color in her face faded. Jonathan looked directly at Emily. "Please join me in welcoming the founder of the Carter Hope Foundation, the principal benefactor of tonight's scholarship expansion, and the woman whose quiet courage has changed more lives than she will ever claim, Miss Emily Carter." The room stopped. Not because people did not understand, but because they understood all at once. The woman in the simple navy dress, the woman who had been delayed at the entrance, the woman whose invitation had been questioned, was the reason many of them had gathered there pretending to celebrate generosity. Then Marcus began clapping. It was not loud at first. It was one young man, grateful and certain, bringing his hands together with tears in his eyes. Thomas followed. Then Table 12. Then the scholarship families. Then the sound spread across the ballroom in a wave that rose beneath the chandeliers until every polished surface seemed to tremble with it. Guests stood. Chairs moved back. The applause grew full, not smooth and practiced this time, but shaken, human, and real. Emily remained still for one breath, humbled by the very recognition she had spent years avoiding. Then she walked toward the stage. As she passed the front tables, a woman who had whispered in the lobby lowered her eyes. The councilman removed his glasses and stared at the tablecloth. Several donors clapped with faces tightened by discomfort, as if the applause had become a confession. Vanessa stood at the doorway, unable to step forward, unable to disappear. Patricia moved beside her and said quietly, "Watch carefully. This is what dignity looks like when it does not need permission." Emily reached the stage, and Marcus stepped down to meet her. He did not embrace her dramatically or make a show of gratitude. He simply held out the folded speech with both hands and whispered, "I wanted you to know I made it." Emily took the paper gently. Her eyes shone, but her voice stayed soft. "You did more than make it, Marcus. You opened the door wider for the next child." Jonathan stepped aside from the podium. The applause faded slowly, unwilling to end, until Emily stood beneath the gold spotlight with the entire gala waiting for her first word. For the first time that night, no one cared what she was wearing. They only cared what she would say. Emily Carter stood at the podium with the gold spotlight resting gently across her shoulders, and for a moment she said nothing. The ballroom waited. Hundreds of people who had arrived expecting a polished charity program now sat inside a silence that felt far more honest than applause. Emily looked out at the round tables, at the donors in evening wear, at the scholarship family sitting near the front, at Marcus Bell standing beside the stage with his folded speech pressed against his chest. Then her eyes moved toward the open ballroom doors, where Vanessa Whitmore stood half hidden in the glow from the lobby, pale and still. Emily did not look at her with anger. That somehow made the moment harder to bear. "Thank you," Emily said at last, her voice soft but clear through the microphone. "I have spent many years trying not to stand at podiums like this." A gentle ripple of nervous laughter moved through the room, then faded quickly. "Not because I am ungrateful, and not because I do not believe this work matters. I stayed quiet because the children were always more important than the name attached to the check." She glanced toward Marcus, and the young man lowered his eyes, smiling through emotion. "But tonight reminded me why names matter. Not for pride. Not for status. Not for a place card near the stage. Names matter because people are erased every day before anyone learns what they carry." The room grew even quieter. At the doorway, Vanessa's chin lowered a fraction. "A child can be erased by a zip code," Emily continued. "A parent can be erased by an accent, a uniform, a second job, or a tired face at the end of a long shift. A student can be erased because they cannot afford the test fee, the bus fare, the laptop, or the winter coat that helps them walk into an interview feeling worthy. And sometimes, a person can be erased at a door by someone who decides too quickly that they do not belong." No one moved. The sentence crossed the ballroom without Emily raising her voice. It found the guests who had watched her in the lobby. It found the volunteers who had stayed silent too long. It found Vanessa standing at the edge of the room with nowhere to place her eyes. Emily rested both hands lightly on the podium. "I am not here to shame anyone. Shame does not build scholarships. Humility does. Responsibility does. Courage does. The courage to notice who is being left outside. The courage to correct a wrong when correcting it costs you comfort. The courage to treat a stranger with dignity before you know whether they are important." Patricia Alden closed her eyes briefly, as if the words had landed exactly where they needed to. Across the room, Maya wiped a tear from her cheek. Ryan stood straighter near the entrance. Emily turned a page on the podium, though she barely looked at it. Tonight, the Carter Hope Foundation is increasing its commitment. Beginning this fall, we will fund 400 additional students across New York City with tutoring, counseling, transportation support, college application assistance, and emergency family grants. No child should have to prove they are worthy of opportunity by surviving without help first. This time, the applause began slowly, then grew strong. Scholarship families rose first. Then teachers. Then donors. The sound filled the ballroom, but Emily lifted one hand gently, asking them to let the moment stay focused. "Please do not clap for me," she said. "Clap for the students who kept going when the world gave them reasons to stop. Clap for the parents who worked double shifts. Clap for the teachers who stayed after school. Clap for every quiet person who entered a room and deserved respect before anyone knew their story." The applause returned, fuller and warmer than before, and this time Emily accepted it for them. Near the doorway, Patricia turned to Vanessa. Her voice was low, but final. "You will step down from all event responsibilities tonight. Tomorrow, the board will review your conduct formally." Vanessa opened her mouth, but the polished excuses had lost their shine. "I understand," she whispered. For the first time that evening, she sounded small not because anyone had humiliated her, but because the truth had. Emily stepped away from the podium as Marcus Bell and two younger scholarship recipients joined her on stage. Cameras flashed, but the brightest thing in the room was not the chandelier, the gold lettering, or the jewelry. It was the quiet recognition passing from face to face as people understood that dignity had entered through the door they had almost allowed to close. And that night, long after the final speech ended, the city's most elegant ballroom remembered the simple woman in navy who taught them that no list, no title, and no polished room could measure the worth of a human being.